Okay, so here we go. I mean, I did promise you that you can gain control over your mind. And well, that also applies to all other success coaching programs. And in case you ever wondered why they sold millions of books, classes, whatever, on emotional intelligence, and you still know, I don't know how many do you know, two or three emotionally intelligent people in your surroundings. So the reason is that emotional intelligence is the conscious controlling of how you behave towards others and yourself. But it doesn't make a lot of sense if as soon as you are in a rest status, you self-sabotage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The default state is when we are idling. So we're doing nothing. We're not engaging our brains with watching a movie, listening to someone, or whatsoever. If we rest, we do nothing. We are relaxed. So what do you think the brain is doing when you are doing nothing? It would seem likely that it's shutting down, right? But actually, the opposite is true. And just look at that. That is pretty insane, isn't it? In a relaxed status, your brain is more active than when you are excited, sleeping. And even though until 10 years ago, the default state of the brain wasn't really known, already in 1929, somebody discovered all of the energy. That's also blood flow. So just like a bodybuilder when he's lifting, and the blood flow through his to his biceps, the same is happening here with the brain. So this is known like nearly 100 years, and isn't it crazy? When a brain part is active, as I said, it means that the blood circulation in those parts increases, and it does take a lot of energy. The definition of the default mode network, DMN, is that it is a set of brain regions that are jointly active during rest, but as soon as you give them a task, they deactivate. At least they should. So you could also say it's a series of self-generated thoughts. And I will explain how it is related to self-doubt, anxiety, self-criticism, and similar limiting feelings. In a resting state, more areas of our brain are active than if we are focused on something. That's also pretty crazy, isn't it? So let's say, focused means you're reading a book, you're doing math exercises, you're listening to a partner or coworker. Actually doing breath exercises in a yoga class wouldn't be enough, but I have a joke on that later on. So these regions of the brain are actually starting to communicate with each other without your doing, without you even being aware or conscious of it. So, well, that definitely does stand in the way of controlling your mind, doesn't it? The different parts of the brain include the hippocampus, and this is like when you're thinking about the past and past memories, and oftentimes it's negative memories, the neoprefrontal cortex. With that, you imagine the future, you also evaluate, you judge. And the areas that process language are also included, and there you make up worst case scenarios, all sorts of judgments. And storytelling is a good thing when you are in the process of influencing others or introducing yourself. But telling yourself, telling your brain, if your brain is telling you stories about negative situations that aren't even real, that is not a good thing. Trust me. So the resting state, it really defines who we are, where we stand in the world. We think about the past and the future. We evaluate ourselves and everyone around us. So we consider what others think about us. And that is, in the end of the day, what lets us function as social creatures. Now, what the brain loves to do, it loves to identify problems and how it would solve them. Self-referential processing. So, well, does this person think I'm fat? Does this person think I'm a loser? And that's also the thinking of others, always is in self-reference. The self-referential processing, you might think, well, you just trash yourself, you think low of yourself, you criticize yourself. Oh man, that really wasn't good. Oh, I shouldn't have been stuttering when I did this PowerPoint presentation for my phoenixes. So all of this. And you judge, and there's no end to you judging. And well, as I well, at least implied, there's a strong tendency towards negative bias. For some reason, this default state always has like the worst ideas. It's trashing us. And yeah, we also, the brain loves to make up stories in worst case scenarios. So our brain just loves to wander. And as long as we are not in control, it will likely wander to places that are pretty dark places that we wouldn't want it to go to. And if you're not in a resting state, so you're not relaxed, you can still activate the demon. And that says something, the way you can activate it. If they did test that with the University of Geneva, well, it's called Genf in the native tongue. It's a Swiss city, so I hope Geneva is right. They told people to criticize others morally. Like, for instance, somebody who's a fan of a different party. So let's say he's like a Donald Trump fan or whatsoever. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. That's so unprofessional. But to be honest, I was aware that it's unprofessional, and I still felt the need to say it. So when they ask people to morally judge others, the same areas of the brain lighten up. It activates the default mode. And the same is true when people are asked to trash themselves. Like they are being asked to repeat to themselves, oh, I am a loser, nobody's ever gonna love me. Oh, you know, these things. So when they are going down on themselves and they also remember all of the situations where they felt shame, guess what? The brain activity looks similar to the default state of the brain. So one of the things the default mode likes to do, and again, we are not consciously aware of it, we have no control over it whatsoever. And it loves to bring out all of those bad memories and self-limiting thoughts. It is good for survival, it really is. But it's not good for our happiness, and it's not good for our goal achievement, and it's not good for our EQ and for our ability to influence others and get along with others too. I call this what we can learn from rats. This is actually the scan of a monkey. And a monkey brain is very, very similar to the default state of a human. And bad news or good news for dog lovers, scientists couldn't figure out what the default state of a dog is. They have no clue. So isn't that the first time that a dog becomes a mysterious creature? And no, I'm not a cat lover. I love any furry animal. I basically love every animal that isn't small and can like fly at me. I don't like mosquitoes, but I like nearly every animal. And while we're talking about it, you know, when people always ask for like, what is your 5 years plan? Where do you want to be in 5 years from now? I tell you where I want to be. I want to be far away in a very nice house, deep in the country, socially awkward. I want to be socially awkward with dozens and dozens of animals. So that is my 5 year plan. And I'm teaching you emotional intelligence. What do you say? So, but let's get serious again. They really managed to do a brain scan on chimpanzees, and I have no idea what's important in a chimpanzee life. So maybe it was like they were worried. Well, this new guy, this new chimpanzee guy, he threatened my social status, and I don't like that. So or maybe they have memories of, oh, well, that was a good grooming session. Again, I have no idea, but it definitely, the brain activity looks very similar to our own. And doesn't that imply that the default state cannot be just formed by society and our culture? It definitely is, to a part. That's going to be another session I'm going to do soon, how our culture forms our brains, but it can't be 100% just from society and culture. At least in parts, it must be, well, it must just be there. Now, why did I put the rats on this slide? Well, as I said, I love small furry animals, large furry animals. Now, you are probably serious. It's just me not being serious. The default mode of a rat is in the now. What it takes yogis 4 years to learn and to practice is the natural state of a rat. It smells the world in that moment. It tastes the world. It experiences just this moment. So if they're chilling, they're chilling. If they relax, they just relax. And, well, isn't that a great state to be in? Brain and disease. As we said, several parts of the brain are active, and they happen to be exactly the same parts where, I don't know if you've heard of plaque in patients of Alzheimer's disease, but it is the same areas where these plaque forms. Brain parts that are not activated in the default mode are, in example, the one for more conceptual, abstract thinking. But other than that, the regions that light up in an Alzheimer patient and in a default state are the same. And on this picture, you see how the red one is a healthy, normal brain in a default state. And you can see how similar it looks to the one of an Alzheimer's patient. And that is one of the first indicators that where we can see that the default mode is important for our survival and for our social existence. I know that so far I have trash talked it, but that is just for its negative bias. When people suffer from Alzheimer, they lose their sense of self. They lose their understanding of their place in the world, and they might know you, they know your name, but they lose the feeling of what is their relationship to you, right? Social anxiety disorder and depression, I put that on one slide because it looks pretty similar. Severe depression or severe social anxiety disorder means that your default mode network is severely damaged. And you probably guessed it already from what we have learned so far. The default mode contributes to depression and anxiety. The thing is that people with depression, the default state mode parts of the brain are way more active in these people with this anxiety disorder or depression. But especially for people with depression, it is way, way, way harder to shut down the default state, even if they do get a task. With healthy people, as soon as you get a task, automatically the default state shuts down. But if you have severe depression, it is very, very hard to shut it off, and sometimes it's impossible. And just imagine that. You want to do something, and all of these negative thoughts come flooding to your brain, and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, as I said, the default state parts of the brain are more active, harder to shut down, and it's a downward spiral. The more negative bias you feed yourself, the more negative you're going to feel. And as soon as they set a goal, as soon as they have like some positive thing going on, they want to get out of it, they want to fight, whatsoever, immediately it gets connected to the part that makes us want to withdraw. And I never had a depression, but I do understand enough of the brain to know that is a terrible situation. And if you are still the kind of person who feels like, oh, come on, just cheer up, then you have a serious lack of empathy. But that's just theoretical, because you joined this class, you joined this training, and I'm absolutely sure you don't have a lack of empathy at all. Life experience also changes our brain. You don't have to be sick. You don't have to suffer a trauma. As we learned earlier, any form of pain, mental or physical, changes the brain. Every breakup, every business failure, also accident, if you're in a car accident, every disease, you name it, every negative life experience changes the brain and potentially can change the default mode of the brain, or our ability to decide when we want to shut it off. And the explanation is going to follow now. Now, first of all, often we think something has to be from a certain range of horrible to be counted as a trauma. You don't have to be involved in a war or the victim of 10 years of abuse. Trauma is very individual. Trauma is what shocks us, what hurts us, but like you could say, it gets us by surprise, so it really shocks us. And now, listen up. This is important, and this is, well, I don't want to say crazy again, but yeah, it is crazy. After a traumatic experience, the brain part responsible for threat detection becomes part of the DMN. I'll repeat that. The brain part that is responsible for detecting threat becomes part of your default state. So this part that doesn't light up in, well, I don't want to say healthy, because we're not sick if we suffer trauma. As you all know, I suffered trauma myself. So we're not sick, but we definitely have an issue we have to work on, because just imagine that. When we spoke about brain and pain, the brain and pain, we have learned that our brain is not on the outlook for identical situation, but for anything remotely similar. Now imagine how this is going to sabotage whatever you're planning to do. Imagine that every time you relax, every time you think of nothing, your brain starts scanning your environment for threats, and as you have learned now, with the storytelling, with a negative bias, and as you learned earlier, with the high amount of errors, because it also reacts to something faintly similar, well, you can imagine that this is quite dramatic, right? So now we're back at Phoenix and at Project Phoenix, and why I feel an emotional intelligence training without the training of the default state and without helping people to rebuild neural pathways that lead to the wrong part of their brain that disservices them, doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, whoever tells you it's possible that this is like a quick and easy job, let's be positive, they potentially don't have a lot of knowledge about how the brain works. So once more, it's not up to society to decide what is traumatic to you. It's not just if you're a stalking victim, a veteran, or something like that. Whatever experience is going to shock you. It could be that the first time you got sacked at your job, or the first time your partner left you, traumatized you. The same is true for chronic pain, and chronic pain was the reason that I originally started to look for a way to be able to handle it better. I currently suffer from chronic pain, and I started to realize how my brain was changing, how I felt that it took. I mean, it is terrible to be in pain 24/7, so let's not kid ourselves about it. But I was feeling that I was giving it even more room in my life than I should be. Like, I was thinking all of these thoughts, well, what happens if you die? What happens if there's no solution? What this, what that? And in my case, because a third person is responsible, I was always thinking also this destructive thoughts like, well, why didn't the person get sick? Why is it allowed for another person to make me sick? Why am I suffering when I am the victim? You know, all of this. And this is not servicing you. And this also leads to, with patients with chronic pain, the same applies that we discussed with depression patients, anxiety patients. They have a hard time shutting down their brains. It doesn't shut down easily. It gives them all of these negative bias, made up stories, worst case scenarios, where they evaluate themselves against others. So all of that. Now let's talk about the good news. You probably knew it was good news as soon as you saw this cute little red. It is possible to change the default state of the brain to an alternative state. And this state is called non-evaluative present awareness. Oh, this was a slide I wasn't sure if I want to keep. But it is actually funny. When I was discussing with, I don't know if you know that this program is totally new. So the people who got into it are only at day 20 today as we speak. But I had a test client, and it's a guy with a lot of issues, so ideal test patient, test client. And when we were talking about the default state and I told him what he has to do, blah, 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 he was like, oh, you know what? My default state is Jackie. And he meant Jack Daniels. It was obviously a joke, but I thought it was really cool. The difference between a trained and an untrained mind. A trained person who has, let's say his knee hurts, he is thinking, oh, my knee hurts. An untrained person would be like, oh my God, and maybe it's something really bad and I need surgery, and what's going to happen if I can't walk anymore and I'm going to lose my job? What am I going to do when I lose my job? And they're starting to solve in their minds all of these problems that happen after they lost their job and after the wife left them because they lost their job. So they're not experiencing the pain in the now for what it is, just a pain. They're doing all of this negative bias around it, and that is pretty damaging. they did a pain experiment, and that was the University of Toronto. They had experienced Zen meditators, and they had regular people, and they gave them pain. It was heat shocks, actually. And the part for sensory brain processing was really, really lit up. It was really active in Zen meditators. It wasn't that active in the regular people. The Zen meditators had less activity in the DMN. So the more disconnected the two systems are, the higher is your pain tolerance. The more you are able to experience a problem for just what it is in the now, the less damaging it is. Your knee is still going to hurt, but just imagine you go through all of the shame of losing your job, the pain of losing your wife, and then your kids look down on you, you know? So the conclusion is, the more you feel the pain and the less you are default mooding. And I made this word up, so don't use this word. I totally made this up. This is not correct grammar. So the more pain you can take and the less you suffer. Untrained people, whatever they experience, triggers just one train of actions. They tell themselves their stories, they evaluate, they judge, and they attempt to solve problems, mostly problems that aren't even there. Theoretical, fictive, is fictive English? Well, they attempt to solve problems that aren't there. So this is my point. Mindfulness means that you can focus your attention. And only people with mind training were able, in all of these tests, and these were universities of Toronto, Zurich, and Geneva. The only ones who were able to focus their attention, even in DMN, were the people who had mind training. So, mindfulness can make us suffer less, even when the going gets tough. I still hope for everyone that they do not suffer neither from mental nor from physical pain, but in any way. If you train your brain, if you become mindful, if you meditate, you will be able to suffer way, way, way less from the same situations. And yeah, meditation changes the brain. I wrote a lot about it in my blog. And it's any form of meditation. It doesn't matter if you do some love meditation or Buddha meditation. It really doesn't matter. The point is just that you are meditating. And the only people researchers found this alternative state, as I said, were the people who had training. And if you care, there's a link to an article that's called, I forgot what it's called, but it is about how meditation changes your brain, how mindfulness changes your brain. Ah, look, the cute rats. Mindfulness changes the default state of your brain. And mindfulness is non-judgmental awareness in the present moment, just like this cute rats right there. Now, the extremely exciting thing is, while you are meditating, the default state of your brain changes, but when you stop to meditate, it's still available for you. So it doesn't happen overnight, and I think I mentioned it 2 or 3 times. It is not happening. You cannot retrain your brain in a 7-hour session, 7-day session, until you are able to make these massive changes to your brain, create new neural pathways, new neural networks. It'll take you 9 weeks. It might take you 12 weeks, but what is that? compared to the reward, right? What is that compared to the reward of being in control of your mind, ending self-sabotage? There's so many things that come with it. But I mean, I know that you've paid attention and you've probably already thought about all of the things that this would change in your life. It's good that our brain has a survival instinct, and I appreciate if my brain is trying to protect me, but it is supposed to protect my life. But what it's constantly doing is it's limiting me. It's limiting my level of success. It's limiting my relationships, my everything. Negative experience should not define who we are, what we achieve, and how we live. So, people, Project Phoenix, suffer less, thrive more. I'll go back on camera right now.